Hello, welcome back to my channel Moretta Threads. In today's tutorial, we are making this dress, which is the final part of look 1 for my free beginner sewing series. It's a long one today, I'm really sorry. So please fast forward to the parts that you don't need, and the parts that you do need, they should be pretty detailed. We're gonna get straight into it, but before we do, there's only one thing, which is this, the sewing pattern. Please have a look at it. It has many layers because there are so many sizes. So please turn off the sizes that you don't need and print the one size that you do need, as well as the layers that say leave checked. Print page 1 and use the measuring box to measure 1 centimeter or 1 inch. If that's correct, then print the remaining pages and stack it all together and remove the right hand border and the bottom hand border. So your pattern may not look exactly the same as this, but just remember that everything is numbered in chronological order and we have letters which dictates row by row. So because we didn't remove the left-hand border and the top-hand border, we have a little bit of a tolerance here, but I just sneak the pages underneath each other just a little bit so that the arrows can connect to create an X, and then I do very small tabs of tape so that I can put the whole thing together so that I can see the bigger picture and make sure it fits really nicely, and then you go in with the longer lengths of tape. Now, because I know what I'm like, I decided to highlight the little notches just to make sure that I don't accidentally cut them off, because I always end up cutting them off. They're usually pointed inwards, they go into the pattern, but for you guys, and making this as beginner friendly as possible, it's way easier to read it if they go outwards. So in our previous sewing patterns, we have so far touched on the fold line, the grain line, and notches. The thing that I'm highlighting here in the pink, that's not really anything. That's just a marker that is going to make it a user-friendly pattern for you. But what we are going to learn today is darts. Darts are often where you find, like on the bust line, it just creates like shape to help mold something to your body. The second thing that we're going to touch on today is that thing on your sewing pattern that says lengthen or shorten here. So I'll show you how you're supposed to lengthen and shorten patterns now. Okay, so say you want to have a longer hemline on your dress. You don't like how short I have designed it. So figure out how long you want it to be. I have measured this little row, and when I cut down like on a row like this, it's about 2.5 centimeters. So say, for example, you want to make your dress 2.5 centimeters longer. You cut down on that where it says lengthen, shorten here, and you add in a little piece of paper like this. And then you would tape that new segment into the pattern, and then see these points here. See how we have like, it's like not quite like perfect. You would just kind of straighten up that new edge line between those two notch points, and that's pretty much how you would do it. But I'm not going to do that today, so I'm just going to tape that back together. Now you may be wondering, to lengthen something, why do I have to lengthen it from the middle of the pattern? Why wouldn't I just add it onto the bottom? And I will show you why now. Because usually the bottom hem of something is designed in a way so that when you go to finish or hem later, it's easy for you to do that. And if you accidentally like alter something too much at the bottom, then you've manipulated and altered the pattern too much, and you're actually going to make it harder for you. I know that's not making sense. Let me explain. So look at the bottom corner of this sewing pattern. It goes down on an angle, and then right at the bottom, it suddenly has a right angle. But I'm just going to draw a straight line like this with an angle and not have a right angle on the bottom, and show you what happens when you don't have that included. So look at this little example. If I slip that under, do you see that the sewing pattern has this little right angle here? But my little example one that I've made has no right angle, and I will show you what happens when you go to hem. Okay, sorry, my camera stopped filming for a second, but I have already folded up a proposed hemline on both of these two little examples. And do you see this edge? It folds perfectly. There's no excess fabric running off the side. So when I go to hem this, it'll hem perfectly. Whereas this example, do you see those little corners? Where do you think that extra fabric is going to go? You'll definitely still be able to hem it. It's just you'll have a little bit of gathering, puckering on the inside seam, and it just won't be as user-friendly for you. Okay, now on my website, I have stipulated how much fabric you will need depending on what size you've printed. Now, I want you to pretend that you've gone to the fabric shop and you have sourced a roll of fabric that you like and it is 150 centimeters wide. Then figure out how much fabric you need based on the chart that I've provided and get that. Oh, that's right. Question, do you remember what a selvage is? A selvage is that little line here. Do you remember? And remember that our grain line runs parallel to the selvage line. To be honest, I never really follow a grain line unless the fabric has stretch to it or the actual grain line is really, really obvious. For the linen, but that's just what best practice is. And please do follow that if your grain line is really obvious. So I am just making sure that I am cutting out those little notches because they're going to make our life easier later. And I am cutting out both the front and the back of the sewing pattern. So this is just what the placement looks like. Remember our fold line, that you want to make sure that you've got your pattern pressed up right on that fold, and that we're just taking time to make sure that we're not wasting fabric. You want to just plot your pattern pieces as best you can so that you're preserving as much extra fabric as you can so that you can reuse it later. Like a scrunchie, which you have learned to do. Now moving on to the strap, I am so lazy. I never fold my fabric the way that I'm supposed to. If I can rip it, I'm going to rip it. So if you have a look at that strap, I would say that that strap piece is probably about 3 centimeters wide. But I cannot be bothered cutting it like how I'm supposed to cut my pattern pieces. So I'm just going to rip up 4 centimeter pieces because I need to account for the really jaggedy raw edge I'm about to get, which is this. So it's really messy. It's a lazy girl method, but you do kind of ruin and curl the edges of the fabric. So to allow for that, that's why I've cut a 4 centimeter strip as opposed to a 3 centimeter strip. Once you've done that, you can just close that up loosely and pop some pins in, and then you can put it to the side. Okay, awesome. Get your front pieces, both the outer and lining layer. We are going to focus on darts now. So I like to do my darts like this. See how I'm popping in some pins? I'm putting in 3 as markers, and then I'm going to turn that pattern piece around. And I'm going to pop those pins in on the other side because obviously the paper interrupts it. If I remove the paper, those markers are going to fall out. So I put them through on one side and then I take it off like that. So the darts need to be done on the bad side of the fabric. And if currently right now you have folded your pattern pieces, cut everything out, and you are already looking at the bad side of the fabric, you could easily just put in some lines front and then back. However, let's pretend that this is the good side of the fabric we're currently facing, and the darts need to be done on the inside. So I've added in more pins so that when I pull this apart and in half, I now have markers on both sides so that I can clearly mark out my lines. Now, ordinarily, you would be using a chalk pen or a fabric pen when you do this. I'm just using a normal pen. Please don't do that. I'm just doing that because it's easy to draw a line for you to see. However, if you don't have chalk, if you don't have pens, you can use tape. It isn't the most eco-conscious method unless you're using eco tape, which I have, but I know that that's not what most people usually use. So this is just like an emergency thing, or if you're starting out and you don't have all the tools yet. And then just create those little dart lines or triangle shapes by folding in or pinching the fabric together. Make sure that the pin is going through the lines, both the front and back. That's how you know everything's in nice alignment, and close it up. So let's do the other side now with the sticky tape side. Using sticky tape is a good option as well when you're using like a mesh or a lace fabric and your pen or chalk isn't transferring onto the fabric. So that's what this looks like. However, the only drawback is when you go to sew on your sewing machine, which you'll see later, we don't actually have a clear line for us to follow. Okay, I know that was a lot of information, so let's do that again one more time on the lining. Put in some pins to indicate the markers, flip it over on the other side, and put in more pins to copy those markers that we've placed. Once you've put in the markers, all 3 of them, you can then remove that piece of paper. Now, say we're currently looking on the good side of the fabric. Remember that the darts are done on the bad side of the fabric. So let's add in more pins so that when we open this piece up, we have markers on both sides. Mark out your dart lines on both of the sides. Remove those pins, we don't need them anymore. Pinch it together and create that dart shape with your pins. Okay, perfect. Let's take that across to the sewing machine. Okay, so with a dart, you can't always do a back tack at the beginning if you're using a very fine fabric. So you get really long tails like this and you just start the stitch and then you just use those long tails to tie off 1 or 2 times that beginning of the dart line. That's what you do for fine fabrics, but I don't usually work with fine fabrics, so I can do a back tack, which looks like this. So put your foot down and we're just going to use that line that we created with our, hopefully, fabric marker if you have one, or chalk. Chalk is also really good, but it just offers a guideline that you can follow and sew along. And because this is a heavy fabric, I can back tack. Clean up those little edges and let's go again. So needle goes down, do a little back tack, take your pins out as you sew, follow the line as best you can, going all the way down, finishing off with a back tack. This is what you should be left with. We've followed the line pretty well. It's okay if it's not perfect. You're learning, it's okay. And then repeat that process and then finish off your 4th remaining dart. Okay, great. This is what you should be left with. However, you remember what we have discussed in the previous episodes. It's really important that you press your new lines as you go. It just really helps you elevate your sewing if you press as you go. So while you're doing that, just make sure that you are angling the direction of those darts down. This is what you should be left with. We have beautiful, crisp dart lines. All right, we are going to now join our lining pieces together and our outer pieces together. So grab the back outer layer, lay it good side facing up, get your front layer and paste that good side facing down. So good sides are currently kissing each other and we should be looking at the bad side of the fabric. Now find the little markers first and join them together and then go in with some extra pins along the perimeter and then do that again to the other side as our reference point. Markers go together first and then we can do the sides. The lining layer doesn't have side markers for you to follow, but it does have those markers which will indicate where our strap placement will be. So just know that the straps go obviously at the top, so those little markers will be facing upwards, and that's how you know which direction to pin together the lining pieces. Okay, great. Let's take that across to the sewing machine. So as a rule of thumb, I do my side seams generally at 5/8 of an inch or 1.5 centimeters. So let's close up those side seams. Doing that, I've got my little white piece of paper as my guideline still. And just remember to start and finish with a back tack. Now I actually made a mistake here. Do you see this dart and the direction that it's facing? It is accidentally facing up and I wanted it to face down. So I'm just picking that apart so that I can redo that with it facing down. So just make sure when you're sewing, you've also pushed it down. So moving on to the other side of that lining piece, following the seam allowance, 1.5 centimeters or 5/8 of an inch. And that little dart is tucked down on both sides. All right, let's just repeat that again on the other side, 1.5 centimeter seam allowance or 5/8 of an inch. So I pretty much always have all my sewing patterns like this, 1.5 on the side seams, and then the top perimeter is usually 1 centimeter or 3/8 of an inch. That's pretty standard across the board. So just repeat that process for all 4 side seams. Okay, great. This is what you should be left with, but have a look at our side seams. They're going to fray, so we need to either overlock them or zigzag stitch. Now I'm going to assume that because you are a beginner, you probably don't have an overlocker. However, when you're sewing or you're following any other tutorial, they're always going to assume that you have both machines to do both of the things, okay? So this is what you do in the overlocker's place. You do a zigzag stitch. It's not perfect. It doesn't look the best, but as your garment is washed and gradually frays, it will hold those edges in check. So before I actually moved on to this lining piece, I was practicing my zigzag stitch on a scrap piece of fabric, which it's important that you do too, because there are different types of zigzag stitches and lengths of the stitch that you'll do. So you'll need to tinker with your machine until you get it right. So you'll just be turning that stitch length on your machine up or down, and you'll also be toggling between maybe 2 or 3 different types of zigzags. Some are thinner, some are thicker. Do what works best for you. So on this piece here, I've gone like a little bit in, but I actually think it's better to run right off the edge because it can help curl in that edge a little bit more, which is kind of what you want to help it from unraveling on the sides. And that's what this version looked like. So I think I actually didn't play around with my stitch lengths enough because I did keep on changing the zigzag width and stitch length. Like, this isn't the cleanest way, obviously, visually. It's not perfect, but it's great for a beginner when you don't have access to everything. There is an alternate way to finish things called a French seam where it completely conceals it. It's really beautiful and clean, but that's generally not what you would do as a beginner. A French seam is really, really neat, but I actually don't usually do them. And I also don't usually sew like this. This is what I actually do. So let me pretend that I am cutting out 2 of my pattern pieces. So what I would usually do with my 2 pattern pieces is I wouldn't join them together with a straight stitch and then overlock the sides. I overlock each of the sides on their own. I'll show you. This. So I have my front piece, I have my back piece, they have been individually overlocked. And then I've gone back in and joined them together with a straight stitch. It also allows me to press open those side seams really nice and flat to have really thin, low profile sides. And the benefit of doing this over the first way and a French seam is that it is so much easier to make amendments. So if you have a 1.5 centimeter seam allowance, that's quite a bit of fabric on the side that you can then go back in and let something in or take something out. It makes it easier for you to manipulate. If you're a beginner sewer, you're probably going to make some mistakes and need to make some amendments. So it's very alteration friendly. If that makes sense, great. If it doesn't, don't worry about it. You're not there yet. Don't need to stress. So let's just move on to practicing our pressing as we go. And we'll just do that for the outer and lining layers. Now, if you're not loving that jaggedy edge of the zigzag, you do need to hem the lining layer. So what you can do is just fold it over twice to conceal it so it's nice and clean. However, learning, it's okay. Let's just do a zigzag stitch. So bring it across to your machine, feed it under, and just do that whole bottom perimeter with a zigzag. Okay, great. This is what you should be left with. We have essentially overlocked that edge. So get that lining, turn it inside out so that they're looking at the bad side of the fabric, and you're going to feed the outer layer inside. Now, the most important point in this is that that little V shape is perfectly lined up. So put your first pin down that, and then you can just add pins around the perimeter. And remember here what we do for seam allowances. Remember that they always go in opposite directions to minimize any bulking or side profile. Okay, once you have added pins around the perimeter of the top, we can now join the outer and lining layers together by closing up that top perimeter. Now the seam allowance for the top perimeter is 1 centimeter or 3/8 of an inch. Remember also the markers that we have in the back segment of the dress. We don't want to sew over these yet because we haven't fed through our straps. These markings are like the opening of where we're going to put our straps later. So just go over them for the time being. And we're going to slow down now because we're getting to the straps for the top part of the top. So I'm just going to draw a little line here. This indicates about 1.5 centimeters away from the top. When you reach that line, you may just need to reconfigure the fabric so that we're still making sure we're doing our 1 centimeter seam allowance. It's just like a little reference point of where you may begin to pivot the fabric. So I'm not going to fast forward here. We're just going to do this slowly together. So back stitch if you can, 1 centimeter seam allowance. Going to slow down as we get really close to the corner. Now, what I want you to do here, actually I'll add in some little marker points just so you know. So around 3 centimeters on either side of that diagonal point, I want you to turn down your stitch length. I want it to be really, really narrow, tight stitches close together, and I will show you why later, but for now just make it narrow. So go slow, and when you finally get to that pin, that is our marker for the center point of this little V-neck. So place your needle down in that point and pivot your fabric, put the foot back down and continue to sew until we get to that little line that we've added there as an indicator. Once you've gotten to that line, you can stop and turn your stitch back length up to whatever you're using before. And then just continue as usual. So we're still doing our 1 centimeter seam allowance, which is 3/8 of an inch. And get to the top, pivot a little bit if you need to, straighten her up, back stitch. And then same thing again. Same seam allowance, try to back tack if you can, and it's fine to pivot the fabric if you need to. Just make sure the needle is down when you do that. So as I get closer to the edge, just remember that we're maintaining the seam allowance and going opposite directions on either side. And then follow through and finish with a back tack and bring it across to the table. Okay, perfect. This is what you'll be left with. And then I'm just removing any excess thread that's getting in our way that we don't currently need. All right, push that to the side, grab those straps and bring it to your machine. All right, what I'm about to do is not standard practice. This is how you usually are supposed to. So you have a strap and you're supposed to have like a seam allowance and like that's the edge that you're going to cut on. What I like to do is I like to flip mine the other way so that I have a very consistent thickness because I never cut things evenly. So if I'm following an edge, that's not a clean edge, at 1 centimeter, my actual strap will end up being thicker in some places and thinner in others. So that's my little hack. If you need a 1.5 centimeter seam allowance, flip the strap to face the other way and use your little ruler on the plate of your machine. Okay, so I made the straps 1.5 centimeter thick, which is thicker than usual. I would usually do 1 centimeter, but I don't know that you have a loop turner. I didn't even know that these existed when I first started sewing, like for the first year or so, but this is a loop turner. So you just feed it through the strap and then it has a little hook on the end that can close and you just close it around the fabric and then you can feed it through. And then that fits really nicely in the little channels that we've made in the top or the dress, sorry. So the process is obviously very, very similar to what we did when we were making kind of with the scrunchie and definitely with the straps. But I'm assuming again you don't have a loop turner, so that's why these straps are 1.5 centimeters thick, so that you can use a safety pin to turn it inside out. You know the rules. Give your straps a press. Currently, you should have 2 really long lengths of straps. So we are going to cut them in half, but before I do that, I just cut off the ends to make sure that they're nice and neat. Then I fold it in half and cut them in half. Okay, we're so close to being done now. This is so easy. So you'll remember that we have 4 openings, 2 on the front and 2 on the back. If you have a loop turner or you have a safety pin, you're just going to feed 2 straps through the holes that we've got on the front, and then just do the same thing again for the holes on the back and secure it all with a pin. So let's just secure those with a stitch. Remember to back tack, and remember we are doing a 1 centimeter or 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Now this is optional. If you don't trust yourself, leave it as it is, because when you pull the strap inside out, this is what you'll be left with, which is great. That looks fine. However, if for any reason you have quite a bit of bulking and it's just looking a little bit off, you may need to just trim away these corners, and you will remember that we did touch on this when we were making the bag. Okay, next point, that little V-neck. So if I just pull this inside out right now, that looks weird. It's not lying down flat, and you're like, that's annoying. Why does it look like that? Because we need to do a little cut there to release the tension in that corner. Now, remember as well that we did quite narrow stitch lengths in this corner, and that was to allow for the cut that we're going to do. So let's do a snip close to the stitch line, but not past that point. And by doing that now, we can manipulate the fabric and open it up. And that allows us to have a very nice, clean V shape now. And there you go. Just pull that lining inside, and you can see how clean of a finish you can get things with a seamless finish. When I was starting out and I didn't have really good machinery, this is what I would do because it presents something really put together. Great news, home stretch. Let's hem the bottom of this. Now, I think the hem calls for a 2 centimeter seam allowance. So what I like to do is mark 2 centimeters all along the edge and then connect those points together and draw a line. So before we press the hemline, we're just going to give these edges a new press as well, because those are the rules, you know that. Now for the hem. Now what I like to do is I find the line that I've drawn and I fold on that edge. And then I just define that edge with the iron. So I just like to do that for the bottom perimeter, making sure everything's being folded over. It's got the 2 centimeter mark, and we have that line that we've got as a reference. Once I have done that entire bottom perimeter, I have a really clearly defined 2 centimeter border. My camera stopped filming here, but you can then just fold it over a second time, and I will show you what that looks like on the sewing machine, which is this. So you can see that I have double tucked it so that I have a really nice clean edge, and I'm going to hem at 1.5 centimeters or 5/8 of an inch. So just maintain that seam allowance, and that's the last step. You have finished hemming the dress. Wait, sorry, make sure you back tack. Okay, that is the end of the tutorial. I really hope it was helpful. If you have any questions, comment below. The next thing that we're going to be doing in this series is look 2, but I'm not sure exactly when I'll be doing that. So please feel free to either follow me on YouTube because of the shorts, TikTok or Instagram, because I always post and document the process of me making something, and you'll be able to see there where I'm at in the schedule. Okay, that's it. I will see you in the next part.